This is an NJN News special report. Governor McGreevey's speech on the state budget crisis.
Hello, I'm Kent Manahan. Welcome to NJN's coverage of Governor McGreevey's speech to the state legislature on New Jersey's current budget crisis. The McGreevey administration estimates the state will face a $2.9 billion shortfall in the current fiscal year. Governor McGreevey will address a joint session of the state legislature gathered at the State House in Trenton this afternoon to outline his plan for balancing the budget by June 30th. NJN senior political correspondent Michael Aron is standing by in the Assembly Gallery. Michael, any indications on where the governor will find the money or make cuts?
Well, we do have some indications, Kent. Stories have been percolating through the press and on our newscast over the past week. You know, Jim McGreevey has been focusing on this budget problem since virtually the day he was elected into office on November 6th. He called this special session of the legislature to deal with the current year fiscal crisis, which he pegs as a $2.9 billion problem, and there's a roughly $6 billion problem looming behind it for next year, which he'll address 7 weeks from now. You asked what he might do today. Well, we're pretty sure that he's going to propose dipping into the surplus. The current state budget was crafted with a $1.2 billion surplus. The administration is expected to ask for about 700 or 800 million of that to help plug this $2.9 billion hole. They're also expected to propose tapping into a surplus in the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund and possibly some other funds that exist with surpluses in state government. And they're expected to propose a tax amnesty program for delinquent taxpayers. Maybe they could pick up $200-300 million from people who owe back taxes. They're also cutting government by 5%. The governor has called on all departments of state government for 5% cuts. It'll be interesting to see what tone the governor strikes today toward the Republicans. In the past 10 days, his rhetoric has been very sharp about it was Republican irresponsibility or his predecessor's irresponsibility that led us to this point. Now that he's addressing a hall full of Democrats and Republicans and needs the help of both parties, it'll be interesting to see whether he tones down that rhetoric. And as I said before, all of this today is a prelude to his budget address for next year on March 26th, where it's assumed the harsher and perhaps politically more difficult announcements will be made. For now, I'm going to toss it back to you because legislators are still milling about here and the governor is not in the chamber. Kent?
Michael, thank you, and we will rejoin you shortly. Governor James McGreevey's approach to balancing this budget is the first major hurdle of his administration. I'm going to turn now to our two political insiders, Republican Roger Bodman and Democrat Rick Thigpen, for their analysis. They're joining us this afternoon in our NJN studios. Rick, let me begin with you. Can this crisis, we heard Michael talk about the coverage the governor has been getting in blaming the Republicans for the state of affairs he finds his budget in as a new governor. Can this crisis be solved in a bipartisan way?
It's going to have to be solved in a bipartisan way. The voters demanded it because the state Senate is split 2020. And that really highlights the political problem that Jim McGreevey has in front of him. There's no question in his mind he's got to do everything he can to make sure the voters understand where this problem originated, that it wasn't his problem, because the solutions that come forward won't be pleasant. Some of them are going to be tough. Tough times demand tough choices. But the challenge will be he's going to need Republican support to get his budget passed, to get these solutions enacted. There's 20 Republican senators who will have a say finally in how this thing moves forward. So Jim will have to make sure the voters understand where the problem came from, but also not go too far to prevent those Republicans from cooperating with him.
Well, Roger, we've certainly heard the governor talk about the blame game, if you will, blaming the previous administrations, the Whitman and DeFrancesco administrations, right, for putting him in this situation. Will the Republicans then be able to be part of the solution? They'll have to be, as Rick is saying, but how conciliatory will they be in solving this problem?
Well, I hope the rhetoric is toned down here, frankly. Kent, you know, there's a lot of blame to go around. I mean, mostly based on the national economy. Mayor Bloomberg, for example, the other day talked about a $4.5 billion budget deficit in the city of New York. He did not spend any time criticizing Mayor Giuliani about that. Many states, in fact, most, have huge budget difficulties. And and New Jersey is not unique. And I hope the Republicans step up to the plate. I'll give you one little piece of history here. When I was labor commissioner some 20 years ago, I inherited a $612 million deficit in that unemployment insurance fund from my predecessor, the former commissioner, who happened to be a Democrat, and the Byrne administration. We fixed that problem, and they likely will utilize some of that solution today. So I'm proud of that fact. It was a Republican answer to a problem some many, many years ago that they're hopefully will be utilizing today to solve this problem. So I hope those kinds of examples are utilized, that this is not a Republican or Democratic problem. It's a problem of the state government of New Jersey, and I hope all of our state legislators and our governor work together to solve it.
The governor has pointed out time and again that this is the largest budget deficit faced by any state in the Union, New Jersey being the wealthiest state per capita income in the Union. He's got a tough nut to crack on this.
He's got a very tough nut to crack, and Roger makes an interesting point, and hopefully as we go forward, everybody will pull together to find the tough solutions. But another tricky part for Jim McGreevey will be the bomb throwing from the outside, those who want to attack his solutions to these difficult problems and use them to score political points. We have to worry about that one. The governor's got a very, very big challenge ahead of him, not just this year, but also in next year's budget. Remember, this is not just a shortfall for this year, it's also next year. The capital markets are watching. People will be watching. The voters are very clear. They don't want him to raise their taxes. So his room for maneuver is going to be limited. He's going to require Republican support, and we'll see if they take a constructive approach to helping us all move forward, or if they use this to score political points looking at the next election.
Why this blame game? Why talking so continuously about Whitman and DeFrancesco, putting him in this hole? What is the message to the people of New Jersey?
Well, the message to the people of New Jersey is very clear. He's going to have to do some things that are very difficult. He's going to have to cut spending probably significantly in order to get us out of this problem. These are unpopular acts for a politician to have to do. He wants to be very clear that the voters understand that he's not doing these things voluntarily because it's his own agenda, but because this is the hand that was dealt to him. This is a problem that he inherited walking into office. He didn't create this budget problem. He inherited it from the previous administration. And it's very important politically for him going forward for the voters to understand that. And it's very important also for the voters to understand this is why these tough steps are being taken. Not just because Jim McGreevey wants to cut their spending or reduce their aid, but because he has no choice if he's going to be a responsible governor and make sure that the budget stays in balance.
Well, the Whitman administration left a large surplus for this governor, which we anticipate he is going to pull from to help balance his budget to the tune of about $800 million.
Exactly, and that's exactly the point I tried to make. I mean, all of this blame game stuff going around here, Kent. I mean, Michael Aron referenced the number, and you just did, a $1.2 billion surplus. I mean, it's a very difficult prospect to determine what the budgetary picture will look like a year and a half or 2 years out. A very interesting story, or a column actually, in today's Star Ledger on the editorial page by former Treasurer Roland Mackled, who was a very serious guy and deep in the economics, to try to point out how they try to plan for this. And they use Rutgers economists and Wharton economists, and they try to determine what the state budget picture will look like some 2 years out. It's not easy to do that. So, I mean, like I said earlier, let's get away from the blame game. You know, Don DeFrancesco cut some $400 million in spending because of his budgetary cuts and spending freezes. These are the kinds of things that the Republicans left. Let's work together to solve it.
All right, Roger and Rick, thank you. And we are now going to stop here and go back to the State House, where Michael Aron is standing by. Michael?
Kent, the Assembly Speaker Albio Sirius has just called the chamber to order. The legislators are in their seats now. Let's go down to the podium.
Mr. Speaker.
Notice of the calendar for this session of the General Assembly having been sent to the members of the House, the Secretary of State, and the State House Press, and posted in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act, I declare the House to be in session. I will now ask the clerk to open the machine for a quorum call. Madam Clerk, close the machine and take a tally.
Mr. Speaker, you have 76 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I recognize the senator from the 33rd District in Hudson County, the Senate Democratic leader, the Honorable Bernard Kenny.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that this joint session of the 210th Legislature does now come to order.
Thank you, Senator. I recognize the Assemblyman from the 5th Legislative District in Camden County, the Assembly Majority Leader, the Honorable Joseph Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second the motion.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am advised by the Secretary of the Senate and the Clerk of the General Assembly that a quorum is present at this joint session of the 210th Legislature. The invocation today will be delivered by the Reverend Robert Reed of the Holy Trinity Baptist Church in Woodbury. Would everyone please rise? Reverend?
Will you bow your heads with me? Thou who did from the beginning walk with man in the cool of the day, come to commune with us even now. We at attention before thee, O God, in gratitude for our many blessings, not at the least of which is the freedom we enjoy, the privilege to live in this great nation with liberty and justice for all. We ask you to save us from the misuse of freedom without restraint. Help us as leaders to seek not the good of any faction or party, but of all citizens. Ever sustain us with a high vision of righteousness. Guide our governor and our assembly and our senate to develop our communities in the ways for thy name's sakes. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance, led by the Assemblyman from Essex County, the Honorable Mims Hackett. Mr. Hackett.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Mr. Speaker, members of the legislature, I wish to inform the joint session that the governor has arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and a distinct pleasure to present the governor of the state of New Jersey, the Honorable James E. McGreevey.
Reverend clergy, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker Pro Temp, Senate Presidents, members of the state legislature, Governor Byrne, cabinet members, most importantly, my fellow citizens.
I know this is an extraordinary occasion, but we have before us an extraordinary challenge that simply cannot wait. Our state faces a serious and imminent threat, a crisis that is going to require our time, commitment, courage, and leadership. For close to a year, New Jersey has been losing jobs and unemployment has been rising. Our economy, battered by the heinous attack of September 11th, is still in the grips of a national recession. Tax revenues are declining. Although I was told when I was elected that I would inherit a balanced budget with a $1 billion surplus, that is in fact not true. The truth is that through a combination of bad times, and I'm particularly sorry to say, irresponsible stewardship, we have been left with an enormous budget shortfall. We are in an extremely difficult position, facing a looming crisis that must be solved immediately. And it must be solved by doing what is right, what is responsible, and not simply what is popular or politically convenient. Just as a family cannot live beyond its means, New Jersey cannot go on with its out-of-control spending indefinitely. Sooner or later, the time comes when an accounting has to be done, the truth has to be uncovered, and the tough decisions have to be made. My friends, that time is now. Solving this crisis will require tough choices and tough measures. Being tough, however, will not be enough. This crisis will also require us to re-examine our priorities, to rethink our mission as we pare down government to a reasonable size. Because only if we approach this with fairness can we do what we are expected to do. So that is what we will be. Tough and yes, fair. Tough enough to make the right decisions and bring discipline back into the process, but fair enough to have shared this sacrifice honorably and to have stood by our principles. Let me tell you where we are today, because this is something that every citizen of New Jersey must understand. We are facing a $3 billion budget shortfall for the remainder of the fiscal year, a shortfall that must be closed between now and the end of June. It is our moral responsibility to close this gap. It is our constitutional responsibility. And even after that $3 billion gap is closed, we have another $6 billion shortfall expected for the year beginning July 1st. In all, we have close to a staggering $9 billion gap in 18 months. Literally $9 billion. Of the 44 states around the nation facing deficits, ours, tragically, is the worst. In fact, the magnitude of the budget gap we are facing is perhaps larger than any state in the nation has ever faced. I don't want to understate this problem. No one in this room, no citizen in this state should underestimate what we are confronting. The decisions ahead are going to be very hard, but let me be clear. We are going to accept this challenge and draw opportunity from it. In fact, we don't just have the opportunity, we have the moral obligation. We must change the way that Trenton does business. In the months and years ahead, we're going to have to be smarter. We're going to have to be leaner, more efficient, more effective. We're doing away with bloated bureaucracy, waste, and mismanagement. And working with Senators Cody and Bennett, Speaker Series, we're going to put New Jersey back on the road to fiscal responsibility and prosperity. New Jersey. Good to see the legislature applauding for fiscal responsibility. We're going to live within our means. There are a number of factors that led us to the situation we're in. The national recession, of course, the horrendous events of September 11th, and more than either of those terrible things was the fiscal irresponsibility, a conscious, unforgivable closing of the eyes by previous administrations to clear warning signs that were there for anyone to see. Over the last 8 years, New Jersey's budget has grown at a dangerous pace, from $14.8 billion just before Governor Whitman took office to $23 billion this year. That's a 55% increase at a time when even the federal government in Washington was learning to live within its means. Our neighboring states of New York and Pennsylvania saw their budgets grow at approximately half that rate. The irony is that those who led the state, fiscal conservatives, increased spending more than any governor in the history of the state, created the biggest state workforce in New Jersey history, and left us with the biggest deficit in New Jersey. A sorry legacy. New Jersey increased spending at twice the rate of our neighboring states of Pennsylvania and New York. And even during the last 12 months, despite repeated warnings that revenues were shrinking and the good times were coming to an end, spending in New Jersey continued to grow at 3 times the rate of other states in the nation. They relied on overstated revenue projections and understated program costs to justify increased spending. The administration knew the estimates were wrong. We found and released the documents to prove it. But despite the gathering storm clouds, they unfortunately did nothing. Utterly unwilling to rein in profligate runaway spending, they put the long-term fiscal future of the state at risk. It was a failure of will. It was a failure of courage. Simply put, it was a failure of leadership. And let me tell you why it was so unconscionable. Because beyond all the bureaucratic jargon, beyond the revenue estimates, the debt service projections, the econometric models that bureaucrats talk about, we're discussing real people with real needs. This isn't just about numbers. It's about whether or not we're going to have a state that has the money to build and repair the schools that our children attend, to hire the best possible teachers to prepare our children for the future. It's about whether we find the money to repair our roads and bridges, reduce traffic congestion, protect our precious open space, to help our seniors to help pay for the prescription drugs they so desperately need. Let me be clear. I didn't want this speech to be my first speech as governor. I didn't run for office to tell you all the things that we can't afford to do as a state. I ran fundamentally to improve our schools, to make sure our neighborhoods and streets are safe and secure. I ran to revitalize our cities and to relieve the burden of property taxes from working families all across this state. I ran because I know the frustration of sitting in a stalled, overcrowded New Jersey transit train, because the frustration of crossing 4 lanes of traffic to get into an easy pass lane, because I wanted to do something about making life in New Jersey better. I ran because I have a child who will be entering school in a few years. Decent, hardworking parents, hey, Dad, who've been paying taxes for the past 50 years. And I want to make sure our state is there for them when they need it most. But we have to remember one critical thing. Unless and until we have a government that operates in a fiscally sound manner, until our own house is in order, all of this is in jeopardy. I didn't create this problem, but I'm determined to work with you to fix it. We're going to do working together. We're going to do what it takes to balance our budget, and we're going to do it right, tough, and fair. Because a budget unguided by our principles is a house without a foundation. As our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln, whose birthday we will celebrate tomorrow, stated during his last public address on April 11th, 1865, important principles may and must be inflexible. And so, here are my bedrock principles that will guide us through this process. First, I will not sacrifice the education of our children. Second, we dare not sacrifice the security of our families and our citizens. And third and finally, we will have a state government that lives within its means. In the days and the weeks and the months ahead, I am prepared to make the hard choices. But I need your help. I need your guidance. As I said in my inaugural, when we come together, there is no problem we cannot solve. I am offering solutions today to a problem that I did not create, a budget I did not produce. So if there is a proposal you cannot support, then come up with something of equal value to replace it. I am open to your suggestions. Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, I want and need your advice. But let me caution you, this is not a time for demagoguery. It is not a time for partisan posturing. It is a time for action and a time for answers. The package that I am presenting today will close the $3 billion deficit that confronts us immediately to bring the last administration's budget back into balance for the current fiscal year. No alternative was ruled out. We relied on the expertise of state budget experts, former state treasurers, economists, and business leaders. Some of these measures will be painful, others less so. Some are long-term measures that will help to make us leaner and more efficient. Others are short-term solutions that will help to get us through to the end of the fiscal year. Let me now detail some of the measures we are taking to bring back the fiscal year 2002 budget back into balance. First, I've already taken executive actions which will save nearly $1 billion. As part of this, we are implementing a 5% across-the-board reduction in all departmental budgets of all state agencies for a savings of $100 million. We've gone to extraordinary lengths to put taxpayers first by exhausting unused balances, freezing unspent reserves, and leveraging our state assets. This combination of measures will save $176 million. We've reduced by 5% the state appropriations to public colleges, a painful $64.2 million hit that I wish I did not have to impose. Additionally, we'll save $7.7 million by imposing a 30% reduction in our assistance to New Jersey's independent colleges. We have extended and expanded the existing freeze on all new appropriations. That will save the state $435 million, but at a cost. It will include cutbacks and freezes, some more painful than others, and a whole host of projects, including $6.7 million that have been authorized for dam repairs, $3.5 million for the museum at the Battleship, New Jersey, $1 million for mobile video recorders for police vehicles, $800,000 for higher education student assistance, $6 million subsidy for the horse racing industry. In addition to those administrative actions, we are taking a series of steps that will require legislative approval. We're taking the unusual step of proposing with Senators Byrne and Lance a tax amnesty program will allow people to have failed to pay their state taxes to come in and do so without fear of penalties or punishment. This will bring in approximately $150 million. But let me be clear about this. Going forward, delinquent taxpayers are hereby on notice. This administration will aggressively criminally prosecute all those tax scufflaws. They will be dealt with severely. In addition, we're going to redirect approximately $325 million in contributions earmarked for the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. This will leave the fund with a balance that experts assure us is more than sufficient to meet whatever needs arise. In all, we have found literally $3 billion to bring our budget back into compliance. But let me warn you, these measures are just the beginning, designed in some cases just to get us through to the end of the fiscal year. In a month, we will need to find additional means of closing a budget gap that is twice as large to bring the fiscal year 2003 budget into balance, real balance. And we are already working long and hard hours to do just that. And let me tell you how we'll do it. We will continue to extract whatever efficiencies we can through reorganization. We will cut waste and bureaucracy relentlessly. We will attack mismanagement wherever it exists. We will merge agencies to eliminate duplication and achieve economies of scale, starting with the Turnpike Authority, the Highway Authority, the Atlantic City Expressway. We're going to make sure that the Easy Pass system, which overran its budget by $300 million, works safely, sensibly, and cost-effectively. And we're going to use this opportunity to make government work and make it work for the people. And I'm not going to put up with any excuses from state government along the way. We can do all of these things, and we can do them fairly. For working together, for surely these are not Republican or Democratic issues. We can move beyond today's crisis, and we can turn these challenges into opportunities. As a state, we remain fundamentally healthy, well-positioned to thrive in the new economy. We have some of this nation's greatest scientists and engineers, entrepreneurs and ideas. We have thriving ports, a critical strategic location between New York and Philadelphia. New Jersey can and will continue to prosper. But I am asking you here today to join with me in putting aside partisan politics, in rejecting the failed policies of the past, and in looking beyond our own short-term interests. Let me say it again. If you cannot support my proposals, then do me the honor of presenting me and the state of New Jersey with an alternative. But we must take these steps now, immediately, today, that should have been taken months ago. Whatever we do, we must be tough, we must be fair, and we must be strong. And we must stick to our principles. We must change the way Trenton's business is done. And if we do this right in the months ahead, we will not only restore fiscal responsibility, we will build prosperity and opportunity for all of the citizens of the state of New Jersey. We will make New Jersey stronger. My friends, now let's do the people's work. Thank you.
Everyone, please rise for the benediction by Reverend Reed. Reverend.
To the only wise God, which is both dominion and power, with glory and majesty, whose existence is even now and forevermore, and for these things we say thank you and amen.
I now recognize the Assemblyman from Camden County, the Assembly Majority Leader, the Honorable Joseph Roberts.
President, I move that this joint session of the 210th Legislature does now arise.
I now recognize the Senator from Hudson County, the Honorable Bernard Kenny.
I second the motion.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. I declare this joint session of the Legislature adjourned.
Good job, Senator.
Michael Aron in the Assembly Gallery. Governor James McGreevey has just finished his joint address to the legislature. The governor said that we're facing a budget crisis in this state larger than any other state in the nation. He said perhaps larger than any state has ever faced. But he said we all must roll up our sleeves, work together, and tackle it, and he proposed his solutions. As we expected, the surplus is being dipped into. The Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund is being tapped. A tax amnesty program is being proposed. But the governor also said that he's going to block some spending that was approved toward the end of the lame duck legislative session that ended about a month ago. Money for dam repairs, for the Battleship New Jersey Museum, for video cameras in state police cars, for the horse racing industry, for tuition assistance. He said these are tough times. They demand tough measures. He got sustained applause several times, mainly at the beginning of his speech and when he ended his speech. The governor is on crutches. He broke his leg a week ago. I think there's some residual goodwill towards this new governor who is facing a difficult budget problem and a difficult physical problem at one and the same time. The governor said that anybody can disagree with his proposals, but it's not right to just carp and demagogue and politically posture. If you disagree with one of his measures, you have to come up with one of your own, something that one of the editorials today also argued for. I've got a couple of people here who I'd like to get some reaction to. Can we hear Governor Byrne and Tom Wilson? Come on down, please. Governor, former Governor Brendan Byrne and Tom Wilson, Communications Director to former Acting Governor Donald D. Francesco. What did you think of this speech?
Great. It's the most impressive thing I've seen since Siegfried and Roy made the elephant disappear.
Yeah, when was that?
Yeah, in Vegas. So no, I think he did a great job of dealing with what the problem is and offering solutions. And I think the most important thing he said is, you don't like my ideas, come up with a better one.
Tommy, your basic reaction to the speech?
He was the governor today. The candidate is gone in one sense, but he's still here. I mean, this has just been a repetition of the message he began the day after the election. It was a lot about talking about the extent of the problem. I think he learned a lesson from about 7-8 years ago when Governor Florio didn't sell the problem enough, and I think this governor is absolutely selling the problem before the real tough choices have to get made in a month from now.
The language towards your boss and his predecessor, Christy Whitman, was awfully tough, unexpectedly tough, I would say. Governor Byrne, I know you were in the state.
I think what he did was he was tough, but then he sort of separated this legislature from the problems of the past. And he said, here's what's happened. We've had 8 years of bad leadership, mostly from the governor's office, and now we got to do something about it. We got to do it together. I don't think he was picking on legislators today and saying it's your fault. They said it's the fault of the institution, and now we've got to correct it working together.
He called it a failure of leadership and said it was unconscionable, and I have to ask you your reaction to those phrases.
Well, interestingly, of about the $3 billion worth of solutions he's proposing to solve what he calls a $3 billion problem, almost 75% of them are thanks to the previous administration. The surplus he's going to tap was created by the previous administration. The health of the unemployment insurance trust fund that now stands at about a $3 billion surplus that he's going to go take $300 million from. That's because Republicans did it. The ability to go and capture money from retired school teachers' benefits post-retirement. That's because Republicans created that account. But interestingly, he also said, I don't want to talk about partisanship. There was clearly blame laying, clearly the idea that this isn't my fault, it was something you all did. And by the way, his own party voted for an expanded saver, voted for a lot of these expensive programs. So I think everybody was complicit, if you will, if there's anything to be complicit in. Like that.
All right, last question. I'm not sure those numbers he used up there really added up to $3 billion.
I did the math too. I got to, well, he started with $1 billion and then I got about a little more than $1 billion. So there's somewhere about $900 million still missing, I guess.
Well, the treasurer is holding a briefing at 2 o'clock today. Maybe we'll get a few $100 million more out of the treasurer. A last thought on this?
Yes, he established a principle, and the principle is that we've got to live within our means. And that's the ultimate message which I think comes out of today.
Brendan Byrne, Tom Wilson, thanks very much. The gallery is emptying. I'm going to send it back to you, Ken.
Thank you, Michael. And we are now going to take a short break in our coverage of the governor's address. We'll be right back with more here on NJN. Hello, I'm Kent Manahan. Welcome back to NJN's coverage of Governor McGreevey's speech to the state legislature on the current budget crisis in New Jersey. The governor completed his address to a joint session of the legislature just a few minutes ago. I'm going to turn now to our two political analysts, Republican Roger Bodman and Democrat Rick Thigpen, for some reaction to the governor's speech. Gentlemen, let me ask you both, Rick, starting with you. Characterize this speech and what you thought of it. It seemed to be a very strong, tough speech from the governor.
Very strong, tough speech. He did a great job of laying out the problem, keeping it simple, letting the people know where we're going. He's going to have to walk a political tightrope, which is he's got to make sure people understand why we're in this dilemma, where the source of difficulty lies, but also he's going to have to bring the Republicans with him, because as he mentioned in his speech, there are no politically convenient solutions. They're even more inconvenient, those solutions, if they're partisan, if they're only Democrats voting for them. Then the Republicans have a free hand at taking shots at him. He needs to avoid that if he can, and that's the tightrope he's trying to walk. Keep the Republicans with him, but also make sure the voters understand that, in fact, it was the previous administration that created this problem.
Is this the kind of speech that will keep the Republicans with him, Roger?
Oh, I think the Republicans are going to be as responsible as they can. I mean, I would characterize this speech as serious, Ken. I mean, obviously, I could live without some of the blame game stuff that was in it, and I mean, you look back, the governor himself voted for some of Christy Whitman's income tax cuts when he was in the legislature. You know, there's a variety of things. Don DeFrancesco, when that horse subsidy program went through in the lame duck, was $18 million. He cut it to $6 million. The governor cut the other $6 million to $0. You know, so the point being that there's a million of these kinds of examples I could cite about Don DeFrancesco and Christy Whitman trying to be responsible during their tenure. So I think we should put this blame game stuff behind us and move forward. You know, the bottom line is it is a problem of the legislature. I think he did reach out to both sides of the aisle, and I hope that they, in fact, take him up on the offer.
We were we heard Aron talking about the adding up of these figures as they were presented by the governor today. And as we also found, they didn't seem to add up to the $3 billion number. We're imagining that the surplus money is included in that, and we may learn more about that this afternoon.
Exactly, Ken. But that's exactly my point about the blame game. Where did the surplus come from? I mean, is the problem really a $3 billion problem, as the governor characterized it, or was there a $1.2 billion surplus, which makes it a $1.8 billion problem? You know, did Governor DeFrancesco freeze $411 million, or didn't he? You know, these are the kinds of things that are part of the blame game argument here. The fact of the matter is, I mean, is Christ severe and real? Absolutely. And does it deserve the kind of serious tone that the governor set? Absolutely. But I don't think it deserves some of the characterization of irresponsible leadership.
Was the tactic here to go beyond the legislature today to the people of New Jersey to continue the strategy of letting them know just how serious this problem is, so that they're on board with a lot of these cuts that the governor is going to have to take in order to balance the budget?
Oh, there's no question about it. I think one of the previous speakers, Mr. Wilson, did mention he has learned a lesson from Jim Florio. He's going to sell this problem very clearly. He's going to bring the voters along with him every step of the way and let them understand why steps are being taken. He's not going to get in front of them. He's not going to do it without talking to them. So he's taking a lot of time to explain this to the voters. Not really so much about the blame game, but he's telling the facts, where this problem arose, how it happened, and why we have to deal with it now. He's got a $3 billion budget gap to fix by this June. That is really extraordinary. It's going to require quick action, tough measures, and then he's got a $6 billion budget gap to deal with next year. That's going to require more very, very tough choices. The voters aren't going to necessarily like everything that's been done, and they're going to wonder who's responsible for this. And you add to it politics. You know, there's no room for the blame game, but there are those who like to take credit for tax cuts and other things and say we're the good guys, you know, but then they don't talk about the problems. We had 8 years of great economic times. Nobody prepared for the future. That's wrong, and there's no putting a smiling face on that.
And we haven't even talked about the possibility and what you might think about tax increases in order to, as we look ahead to the $6 billion nut that the governor says we have.
About tax increases.
I think we might. We're going to go now back to the State House, where lawmakers are still digesting the governor's speech, when Michael Aron is standing by with some more reaction. Michael?
Ken, thanks very much. I'm with the two ranking officers of the Assembly Budget Committee, the chairman, Lou Greenwald of Camden County, and the ranking Republican member, Joe Malone of Bordentown, Burlington County. A basic reaction before I get to some specific questions.
I think the governor set the stage for the realistic crisis that we face and put forward some solutions as to how we can close the gap and try to stop the bleeding that currently exists. This is something that's going to take bipartisan effort. If you look at some of the items that were frozen, it seems to affect every county in the state, taking a quick glance at what was handed to us by the administration. And I heard the governor very clearly. If there's something that we disagree with in that budget or one of those suggestions, come to him with an alternative. But every time we need money back for a program in our communities, in our district, it means we have to take it from somewhere else. It's going to have to be a very difficult argument.
Your basic reaction?
I'm very disappointed. I think the governor really, rather than be conciliatory and try to work with both sides of the aisle, he talked about not wanting to be a demagogue, and I think the first three-quarters of his speech did nothing but berate and belittle the Republican Party. And I think that in and of itself it's obvious that the budget has its fix within the budget. He was able to find $3 billion in the budget. What is the crisis? I still haven't gotten a list from him of the different items that we could have done differently leading up to September 11th. And the reaction that we've gotten here today from other members of my party in particular, I think we were very disappointed because of last evening's briefing.
Were you surprised by the toughness of the rhetoric towards Republicans addressing a room half full of Republicans?
Well, look, I have a great deal of respect for our colleagues on the other side. And I understand what Mr. Malone is saying. The reality is, though, that the Republicans had the majority of the legislative body before September 11th. And if they disagree with these proposals, let's put up or shut up. Let's put programs on that will change the course.
Why do you think he was tough like that?
I think he forgets that he's now the governor. I think this would have been an appropriate speech maybe in October. But now is the time to be a statesman, look towards everyone in the legislature to come up with good solutions.
Did he make it tougher to get his program through the legislature?
I'll be honest with you, I think it did from our perspective. After last night's briefing at Thigpen, I specifically asked if the governor's office was going to tone down the rhetoric.
Were you at the briefing last night?
Yes, I was.
So he did have a bipartisan briefing.
Well, no, it was not bipartisan. There was only Republicans there when we were there at 8 o'clock last night. But I was hoping, because I asked that very specific question, can we tone down the rhetoric so that we can move forward?
And what was the answer?
And it was my thought process coming out of that meeting that they would be a little bit more conciliatory and have extend a working hand to both sides of the aisle.
Somebody in Greenwald says that he was impressed with McGreevey's call on Republicans to replace anything that they disagree with. You last week, go ahead.
The call was not just for Republicans. It was for Republicans and Democrats who disagree with the message, or programs even in Democratic districts or Democratic counties to make alternatives.
All right.
It's a bipartisan effort here.
Somebody Malone, last week you criticized what's expected to be in the next phase of the governor's plan to address the budget problem, doing away with the rebate, the New Jersey Saver rebate for a year. You said that's a tax hike and people shouldn't have to deal with it. Are you prepared to come up with $900 million in alternative cuts and meet the governor's challenge today?
I am more than willing to sit down with the governor, go through an entire list of things that we have done over the last 8 years and come up and alter or change. As one of the prime sponsors on school construction, I offered that last evening. As one of the prime sponsors on the solid waste financing, I'm willing to sit down on any issue that the governor wants to sit down. But sit down and talk reasonably. Don't shout at people and don't antagonize people and don't do the very thing that he talked against, and that's demagoguing. And that speech today was nothing but demagoguery.
Let me give Mr. Greenwald a quick rebuttal, and then we're going to toss it back.
Well, tough measures call for tough talk and tough times. To some extent, I think the legislative body and government as a whole needs to be almost shaken into reality. We have borrowed and spent more than we have brought in. There is no doubt. We can debate over what that number may be, whether it's $9 million over the next 18 months or $9 billion over the next 18 months or something less than that. But the reality is that we have a significant deficit, and we are facing a historic crisis. And government leaders need to lead now. If you're not happy with the way the governor projected his speech, that's your opinion. It's your right. But let's now work together within our own equally independent body as Democrats and Republicans to work either with the governor or make suggestions in a cooperative effort to try to solve this problem.
Is that okay with you?
Well, when the time comes when he wants to reach out, I will be there.
Assemblyman Joe Malone and Assemblyman Lou Greenwald, thank you both very much. I'm Michael Aron. We're going to hear more about Governor McGreevey's speech when we go back to you, Ken.
Thank you, Michael. And we are going to now turn back to Rick Thigpen and Roger Bodman for their reaction. Just very briefly, both of you, what you just heard from Assemblyman Malone and Greenwald.
Well, Assemblyman Malone highlighted the political challenge in front of McGreevey. You heard his anger about how his rhetoric was about talking about who's responsible in the past. That's a real challenge for Jim, is to talk about the past honestly, but not keep the Republicans too angry that they fight every step of the way
Bring
along.
them along the way.
I would agree. During the course of the speech, you saw as the camera panned the legislature, you saw a lot of Republicans sitting on their hands and Democrats applauding wildly while these lines were being delivered that essentially attacked the Republican Party. So you got to get past that stuff. I mean, it's not going to work going forward, and I hope we are past it.
Rick, let me ask you: is this more than a budget just about numbers alone?
That's what Jim said in his speech, and I agree with him 100%. And I want to raise one sacred cow we haven't talked about today, and that's school aid. The Republican majority in the previous legislature went a long way to allocate money not just for Abbott districts, but to all districts because they felt that's what was appropriate. That cost the state a lot of money. Jim McGreevey is going to have to take a look at that. It's politically volatile, but take a serious look at funding districts that need the aid, not just giving money to all districts across the state to make Republicans happy as well.
Okay, 10 seconds on your closing thoughts, Roger?
Well, everything's got to be on the table. The property tax saver rebate, a popular program that the Republicans put forward, those kinds of things. I think we all have to work together to solve this problem.
All right, Roger and Rick, as always, thank you so much for being with us today. That's all the time we have. We'll have more on Governor McGreevey's speech on NJN News tonight at 6, 7:30, and 11 o'clock. I'm Kent Manahan. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.